hardened American soldiers, these Ivy men of the 4th Infantry Division, were dealt a tough hand in the Vietnam War. It was their lot to draw the almost impenetrable jungle of the 2nd Corps area near the Cambodian border to face the elite regular North Vietnamese army. Assigned to a narrow corridor honeycombed with North Vietnamese units operating all the way from the Cambodian border to the coastal plain of South Vietnam, the courageous Ivy men carried the war to the enemy and faced him toe-to-toe for a slugout that ended in triumph for the 4th Infantry Division and a greatly expanded area of influence for the 2nd Corps. This is the heroic story of the 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam. During 2 earlier wars, the 4th Division had built a solid tradition of courage and the capacity to overcome the enemy. Organized in 1917, the Ivy Division, so called because of the Roman numerals in its name, earned campaign streamers at the Marne, Chateauthierry, Saint-Mihiel, Verdun, and the Argonne Forest. In World War II, they spearheaded the drive along the Siegfried Line and were heavily engaged in the Battle of the Bulge. They were the first to smash ashore on Utah Beach. The first to set foot on German soil. And among the first to enter Paris. And now the 4th Division was in action again, this time in Vietnam. In the summer of 1966, more than 3,000 men of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division arrived in Quy Nhon, on the coast of South Vietnam, to continue the American buildup in that beleaguered country. As the advance contingent stepped ashore, they were welcomed by the Vietnamese and by their commander, General William C. Westmoreland. They then boarded buses to the airstrip for the last leg of the journey to their base camp near Pleiku, within the 2nd Corps area, which was located between the Cambodian border to the west and the South China Sea. The 1st Cavalry was already established in a narrow corridor at An Khê, but seasoned North Vietnamese Army units in regimental size controlled the great bulk of the area. The Central Highlands, difficult terrain made up of jungle, mountains, and waterways with the highest incidence of malaria in Vietnam. This was the lot of the 4th Division. The division base was established at Dragon Mountain, renamed Camp Enari, after Lieutenant Mark S. Enari, the first Ivy officer to fall in Vietnam. The rainy season was just beginning, and operations were severely hampered. But neither the weather nor the harassing enemy could deter the Ivy men, who were determined to make the area their own. The engineers arrived with the division's advance party and quickly began to carve at the base of Dragon Mountain in what would soon become a city in the jungle. With security details always on alert against sudden attack, the men of the 4th cleared the area and established their quarters. Mortar-proof bunkers and fortifications were built. Metal runways were set down for aircraft landing strips. And roads were slashed through the jungle to keep convoys rolling and troops on the move. Within little more than a year, the Ivy Division base camp contained more than 900 buildings. The harsh countryside was peopled mostly by montagnards, a nomadic people who slash and burn clearings in the forest, farm it for a time, then move on. Harassed and terrorized by the Viet Cong, these simple folk fell victims of a time and circumstance they could not fathom. A need to evacuate the montagnards to safer areas became apparent as enemy activity increased around their villages. A program was evolved for the resettlement and care of the montagnards. In each move, the entire village was lifted bodily, huts, belongings, and all, and transported to a more secure location. The men of the 4th Division helped to create a tight bond between the montagnards and their country. Ivy men swept through the steaming jungle near the Cambodian border, seeking to block North Vietnamese regiments who periodically dashed across the border in hopes of a quick victory. Often, small units of Ivy men would suddenly clash with overwhelming numbers of the enemy, who pounced with swift ferocity. When the big guns of the 4th were called in for support, and the heavy lead began to fly, the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, disengaged as quickly as they had appeared. In that autumn and winter of '66, the enemy were often able to elude our pursuing fighters. We hit them from the air. But they were adept at camouflage and could only be flushed on the ground. But if that's what it took, the Ivy men were ready. They embarked on a series of search and clear missions to locate the enemy and to rout him. The big mobile guns continued to do their share in dispersing the enemy. In operations like this and similar actions in early '67, the powerful partnership of heavy mobile guns and Ivy infantry combined to pin down large enemy units and methodically beat them into the ground. Operation Sam Houston grew out of an attempt by the Viet Cong to interrupt work on a vital road being built from Pleiku to a special forces camp near the Cambodian border. The road-building crew had been the target of numerous mortar attacks and the scene of violent firefights. Despite intelligence reports of a large mass of NVA units, elements of the 4th Division moved through difficult terrain to meet the elusive enemy. There were few landing zones in the dense jungle, and areas had to be cleared before resupply ships could bring in supplies and take out the sick or injured. This was the only physical link with the outside. Choppers were called in for all types of assignments. Top priority went to combat assault missions. To spot enemy concentrations under the umbrella of dense jungle foliage, light observation helicopters were used. Once they located the enemy, the light spotters called for their big brothers, the heavily armed Huey gunships. These choppers pack an impressive resource of firepower. The gunships strike quickly, with uncanny accuracy and formidable power. Their presence on the scene was welcomed by the ground troops below, who moved in quickly to exploit the gunship attack. For the NVA, this technique was a costly experience, resulting in a great loss of men, installations, and equipment. While their buddies hacked and beat their way through the thick jungle in the north, the 3rd Brigade of the 4th Division, working with the Vietnamese Army, was assigned to War Zone C along the southern waterways. In the winter of '67, this task force spearheaded the action in Operation Cedar Falls. Positioned along the southern sector of the Saigon River, a mechanized battalion of Ivy men was charged with a twofold mission: to engage in clear and hold operations along the river, and to block the escape route of fleeing Viet Cong. As so often happened in the course of their mission, Ivy men uncovered a rich cache of rice left behind by the VC, which was airlifted out for distribution to the South Vietnamese. Hard on the heels of Operation Cedar Falls came Operation Gadsden, in which a battalion of Ivy men fought together with elements of the 25th Division. On one of their many sweeps deep in the jungle near Cambodia, they succeeded in taking a division-sized Viet Cong complex. At first, the Americans had met heavy resistance, but on the second day, they moved in and found that overnight, the enemy had abandoned the area. The complex was there to be taken. At the same time, within the 2nd Corps area, the 4th Division concentrated on expanding its area of influence. With determination and tenacity, they hit the enemy with tremendous firepower. Between contacts with the enemy, the existence of the 4th Division was characterized by long periods of watchful waiting, with time for relaxation. And time to do the hard work that needed doing. Then, all at once, short but brutal pitched battles. The pattern until, in April of 1967, the 1st and 2nd Brigade moved into Operation Francis Marion, while operating from bases nicknamed Jackson Hole and the Oasis. The objective was to screen and guard the strategic border west of Pleiku. Throughout the extensive operation, units of the Fighting Fourth had clashed with the well-equipped North Vietnamese troops infiltrating into South Vietnam, moving men and equipment quickly into place to block enemy forces wherever they chose to cross the border. During the operation, operation, massive artillery was employed. More than 400,000 rounds hit the enemy where it hurt. This devastating firepower was a major factor in quelling the enemy offensives and in demoralizing the NVA forces. While the rest of the division enjoyed the successes of Operation Francis Marion, the Ivy men of the 3rd Brigade swung into Operation Cook. Convinced that most of the villages and hamlets in the area around Dak To were either Viet Cong or sympathetic to them, the 3rd Brigade undertook an intensive search operation. Countless tunnels and holes in the area turned up Viet Cong supplies and prisoners. But along with the spoils, the Ivy men had to pay a price for victory. In the fall of '67, a North Vietnamese Army regiment moved into the Ia Drang Valley from the sanctuary of the Cambodian mountains to threaten the Special Forces camp at Pleiku. An area sweep was undertaken. Contact was immediately established. NVA patrols were particularly active around roads, but round-the-clock Ivy operations effectively neutralized the threat. The men of the 4th succeeded in blocking the NVA thrust to destroy Pleiku, while simultaneously blocking thrusts as far south as Ban Mi Thuc. At the same time, intelligence reported a heavy enemy buildup in the dusty, inhospitable valley near Dak To, 55 miles north of Pleiku. The Ivy men quickly responded to the challenge, moving the infantry battalions of the 1st Brigade into the rugged mountains near the Cambodian and Laotian borders. They found the enemy dug in along all major terrain features. True to their tradition of courage and daring, the men of the 4th worked their way up enemy-held hills. With an airstrip at Dak To under constant attack by 122mm rockets, Ivy men slugged it out in the surrounding hills in sharp-pitched fights against a shrewd, well-trained, entrenched enemy. The final battle at Dak To occurred on the northern slopes of Hill 875. And on Thanksgiving Day, in the 5th and final day of the assault, they hit the hill continuously with airstrikes. Artillery and mortar rounds. Air Force strikes destroyed whatever cover the NVA might have used in defense of their position. Against all odds, Ivy men air assaulted Hill 875, cutting off a vital supply and withdrawal route for the North Vietnamese. In doing so, the fighting force proved they could win a major confrontation with NVA regulars. The support of all units was vital to the success of the battle. The cry medic, shouted on the battlefield, threw into operation the most sophisticated facilities known to man in wartime. Within moments of the call, medics were on hand to treat and evacuate the injured. During the Battle of Dak To, the Ivy men fought against 5 North Vietnamese regiments. This involved 3 U.S. brigades, supported by 17 batteries of artillery. resulting in more than 1,600 of the enemy killed in action. Throughout the rugged Central Highlands, the most significant battles were for the hilltops, since the force that controlled the hilltops controlled the valleys below. The 4th Division fought to seize the most strategic hilltops for firebases. This meant several days of saturation airstrikes. And artillery fire. After the infantry had forged its way to the top, a bunker-type perimeter defense was constructed, followed by a land-clearing operation. When completed, the hilltop was a barren, dusty knob protruding from the valley floor. But even then, the area was by no means secure and had to be defended against enemy assaults. Combat patrols were sent to seek out and ambush the enemy. Forward observers pinpointed enemy positions for IV artillery. While in the valley, pursuit of the NVA continued. Contributing to the victory at Dak To Hill were the big tanks and tracked vehicles of the division's armor. These rumbling giants brought new dimensions of firepower, mobility, and shock action to the ground fight. A Viet Cong ambush on a convoy was abruptly turned into a rout when tanks and armored personnel carriers moved into action. In short order, they had the enemy on the run. At one time, military leaders believed that the use of armor in the jungled mountains was impractical. But a tank battalion, 2 tank-laden cavalry squadrons, and a mechanized infantry battalion fulfilled a variety of successful missions with the 4th Division. These included search and clear, fire support, perimeter defense, road security, convoy protection, and service as a mobile reaction force. Thanks to its impressive record, armor and mechanized infantry became an integral part of the military posture in the Central Highlands. The month-long Battle of Dak To Hill, part of Operation MacArthur, was the turning point for the 4th Division in the 2nd Corps area. But they continued to fight the enemy wherever they found him. At Linlock, harassment of the evasive enemy was almost a daily occurrence. In the Antennae Valley, after lacerating enemy artillery fire, Ivy men were sent out to engage an NVA force of battalion strength. Again, the phantom enemy evaporated when surprise and favorable odds were not his, leaving behind considerable arms and equipment. And numerous graves. In the Antennae Valley, too, a vital landing zone had to be secured so that needed communications equipment and supplies could be flown in. Units of Ivy men closed in on the NVA positions and met with heavy small arms fire. But in the end, the enemy was neutralized and the landing zone secured. As the struggle went on, a new enemy buildup in the Dak To area was reported in the winter of '68. Troops of Ivy men were airlifted for an assault on strategic Hill 1049. Wave after wave of helicopters lifted the fighting men into the assault. Moving with the precision of a well-integrated combat force, the seasoned Ivy men forged their way through enemy-held positions and took the hill in 5 sorties. From their newly won hilltop advantage, the men of the 4th were then able to send out numerous short-range reconnaissance patrols to locate the enemy and report their position. Mortar fire was then poured into the positions to pin the enemy down. AH-1G Huey Cobras swept in with rockets and raking machine gun fire. Superior firepower and mobility prevented the North Vietnamese from mounting even one major offensive in the area. Thanks to the short-range reconnaissance patrols and their supporting units, threat after threat to the 4th Division area was eliminated. The 4th Division has been eminently successful in the Central Highlands. Within 2 years, their zone of influence increased tenfold, covering some 10,000 square miles of rugged terrain. That's the story. The success of the 4th Division's mission was due to the dedication of young men working as a team. Each man was totally devoted to the job at hand and to his fellow soldier, dedicated to give the best that was in him, because that was the best way out for himself, too. The 4th Division, answering its 3rd call to arms, saw its duty in Vietnam's Central Highlands and did it with dignity and distinction. The officers and men of the seasoned 4th Infantry Division stand fully prepared to defeat communist aggression and give the people of South Vietnam the opportunity to live in peace and in freedom. Throughout Vietnam, the Ivy patch is worn proudly by Ivy men and feared by the enemy.
Hello, I'm Colonel John Gordon, and this is Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Anytime, any day, any week, any season. Training in the 82nd Airborne Division is continuous, hard, and demanding. It has to be, to build strength and stamina. It is training that develops each trooper's confidence in himself and his ability to function with discipline and control in any situation. Teaches him the many military skills that make the airborne trooper a formidable fighting man. makes him combat ready on the ground and in the air. This endless high-pressure training keeps the 82nd Airborne in top-notch condition for battle. As part of the United States Strike Command, it is prepared to move out swiftly by airdrops or air landing to trouble spots anywhere on Earth. The 82nd is proud to call itself always combat ready.
3, 4. All the way, sir.
Airborne.
Up, up, up.
All the way. A slogan that expresses the fighting spirit of this great division. But perhaps the slogan that best describes the pride and patriotism of the 82nd is the one given it officially in 1917, because it was composed of fighting men from every state in the Union, all American. The 82nd started as an infantry division in World War I. Sergeant Alvin York was with the All-American Division. Also a major named Jonathan Wainwright, destined for greatness as a general in World War II. At war's end, the All-American Division was demobilized. It came alive again in 1942 when it was reactivated as an infantry division under General Omar Bradley. When General Matthew Ridgway took command later that year, the 82nd became the Army's first airborne division. From the start, airborne training was rugged. They ran and ran some more. They jumped and climbed and crawled. There were calisthenics, rifle range, shoot school, glider loading, practice jumps, crash landings. Training was continuous from Fort Benning, Georgia to the sands of North Africa. The men of the 82nd were learning what it meant to be really combat ready. And ready they were when the first mission was announced in July 1943. Blowing up clouds of desert dust, they took off from North Africa and headed out over the blue ocean. Ahead was their first combat jump. They were to drop into Sicily behind enemy lines, ahead of an Allied invasion that was coming in by sea. The men of the 82nd advanced 150 miles in 6 days. The German and Italian defenders were routed, but not without hard fighting. The Sicilian campaign was the first combat proof that American airborne doctrine was valid. And the fighting quality of its paratroopers was made dramatically clear. The next jump came soon afterward. The Allies had landed at Salerno on the Italian mainland, but the bridgehead was in trouble, so the 82nd went in. The Germans, some of Hitler's best troops, fought savagely with everything they had. It wasn't enough. They were beaten back. On October 1st, 1943, Naples was liberated. Men of the 82nd led the way in, but they had little time for the victory celebration, as elements of the division fought at the Anzio beachhead. They pursued the Germans into the Apennine Mountains. They had to fight mud and exhaustion as well as rocky heights. Spearheading the 5th Army's advance, they finally joined the British 8th Army at Mount Samucro. Then the 82nd was relieved and sent to England. This was their first real breathing spell since Sicily. No one really believed it would last for long, but it was nice while it lasted. Replacements began pouring in, and intensive training was resumed. biggest jump of all was coming up, into France, to smash the walls of Hitler's fortress Europe. Once again, they were going in ahead of the ground forces. The 82nd Airborne, the new 101st American Airborne, and the British 6th Airborne. The German army was taken by surprise, but not completely. The jump had scattered paratroopers all over Normandy. The fighting became a confused melee of small unit action. The troopers struck out hard and captured Sainte-Mere-Eglise, a key point in the Nazi defenses and the first town to be liberated in France. It was a slow process. They had to bleed for every town, field, and hedgerow. The 82nd fought for 33 days without relief or reinforcements. The enemy wished they hadn't. Of the 13,000 men who jumped into Normandy, only 5,000 were still on their feet when the 82nd was sent back to England to rest and rebuild the outfit. Almost as bad an ordeal was the Battle of the Bulge, when Hitler's panzer divisions cracked the Allied line in Belgium. The 82nd was called on to hold the northern shoulder of the Bulge. Not only were they outgunned and outnumbered, they were freezing. Like their fellow paratroopers of the 101st at Bastogne, the men of the 82nd threw back one desperate attack after another. Finally, the Nazi drive was played out. Airborne soldiers stayed on the ground now to race across Germany, scooping up a fantastic number of prisoners, including the entire 21st German Army, 145,000 men. It was an inglorious end to Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich. And a triumphant war's end for the 82nd, which was chosen by General Eisenhower to act as American honor guard in Berlin. But best of all was the victory parade down New York's Fifth Avenue, led by General Gavin in January of 1946, when the All-American Division came home to be welcomed by an All-American audience. Unlike the aftermath of World War I, there was no deactivation for the 82nd this time. Instead, it was made a regular Army division, and it worked at it, mastering new techniques and equipment. Peacetime training and maneuvers were almost as rugged as World War II. A series of large-scale field exercises made sure that the 82nd lived up to its reputation of always being combat ready. There was some disappointment at not being called on to help in Korea, but that almost totally mountainous country made the use of airborne troops impractical. Always among the first to be trained in new fighting techniques, the division learned how to cope with a nuclear environment using simulated nuclear weapons. These training exercises ranged from coast to coast and as far north as Alaska, where the paratroopers were drilled in cold weather jumping and tactical maneuvers. Then they were exposed to the tropical heat of the Canal Zone and Vieques Island in the Caribbean. For the 82nd, being combat ready meant being fully prepared to fight in any location on Earth. Real combat seemed close in 1962. The All-Americans were set to go all the way during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October. The 82nd stayed on full alert until the threat of war was over. However, another alert 3.5 years later did result in the 82nd being under fire again. Late in April of 1965, the 82nd Airborne, as part of the Army's Strike Command, received emergency orders to deploy into the revolt-torn Dominican Republic. The 82nd led the way as the advance guard of an inter-American peace force fielded by the OAS, the Organization of American States. Anti-communist Dominicans were on hand to greet them with warm support. But the troopers soon learned that not all the local citizens were friendly when they undertook their first mission. This was to secure the east bank of the Azama River and the Duarte Bridge that crossed it. The airborne soldiers promptly came under sniper fire from rebels holding commanding positions on the other bank. It was a baptism of fire for most of the young troopers, but they took it with the cool competence of veterans. They crossed the bridge and penetrated Santo Domingo, where they set up a network of outposts and checkpoints to contain the rebel sector. Nonetheless, rebel fire was heavy throughout May and into June. The airborne soldiers moved swiftly and expertly to knock out snipers. The 82nd was under strict orders not to take the offensive, since negotiations with the rebels were underway. The discipline remained firm despite harassing rebel fire that wounded many civilians, innocent bystanders who were swiftly evacuated to field hospitals, where they received the same care given to the wounded paratroopers. The 82nd's task was eased considerably when troop contingents arrived from Latin American countries who were members of the Organization of American States. An inter-American Jeep patrol toured the city until peace negotiations were successfully concluded on the 31st of August. Then the 82nd was promptly redeployed home. Back at Fort Bragg, the 82nd picked up where it had left off. More airborne training and maneuvers to keep the division's skill in airdrops razor sharp, and to make sure its air landing capabilities were up to the minute. In realistic battle exercises, they worked out with the Sheridan, an armored reconnaissance airborne assault vehicle. It's a formidable addition to the 82nd's firepower. It can be air-dropped as well as air-landed to support initial waves of paratroopers with heavy firepower. It has a 152mm main gun. And a guided missile, a shillelagh. When the Vietnam conflict came, the men of the 82nd promptly went into the field to practice the tactics of counter-guerrilla warfare. Enemy forces were simulated by their own men, using guerrilla tactics of hit and run. However, their line of retreat was scouted by helicopter. The home base of the guerrilla force was pinpointed. This was a Viet Cong-style village, a typical guerrilla strong point. The encircling paratroopers received the word to close in. The guerrillas put up a last-ditch resistance, but the airborne soldiers quickly overran the village and began a roundup of prisoners. Some of the guerrillas tried to get away through an exact replica of a Viet Cong escape tunnel. Even though the mock battle had been won, the note of battlefield realism remained, as hiding places and booby traps were cleared. Rugged field training under realistic conditions, the 82nd's formula for being always combat ready. 1968, the All-Americans were called upon to put this counterinsurgency expertise to use in battle. The 3rd Brigade was sent to South Vietnam during the Communist Tet Offensive. General Creighton W. Abrams was there to greet them when they arrived. The 3rd Brigade troopers moved to the Highlands and set up their base camp. They dug in. They might move, but they weren't about to be moved. Bunkers were built, firing positions sandbagged. 4.2-inch mortars were set up. Automatic weapons were cleaned and checked. With swift, smooth professionalism, the All-Americans built a defense perimeter to secure their base camp. Then its attack force was ordered, along with the troopers of the 101st Airborne, to move toward the ancient city of Huey. Enemy forces were trying to support communist troops holed up in the city. They were to be stopped, their positions saturated with heavy concentrations of artillery and automatic weapons. Helicopter gunships swept in with rockets and machine guns. Then the airborne troops closed with the enemy in a vicious firefight that raged through the day and night. Next morning, the beaten enemy withdrew, and our troops occupied the ground. The enemy's bunkers had been smashed to rubble, but our soldiers, trained to take nothing for granted, carefully searched the debris for guerrillas holed up to make a suicide stand. But the Viet Cong really were gone, except for those who had been killed or captured. The performance of the 3rd Brigade was outstanding. It remained in Vietnam as an independent unit until late 1969.
The 82nd Airborne already has a fully trained new brigade, the 4th to replace the 3rd. They continue to train tirelessly to raise their high state of combat readiness a notch higher.
To make its superb fighting men tougher, smarter, deadlier soldiers, its schools are busy developing small unit leaders, training specialists in old and new military skills. This is the Raider School, the 82nd's adaptation of the famed Ranger course at Fort Benning. Its carefully chosen students are taught how to live off the land, to endure hardship and fatigue, thirst and hunger. They must be able to carry out patrols in difficult country, to bring back intelligence information or prisoners. So they are taught to overcome any kind of natural obstacle.
Report. Sergeant, ready to step in. Request permission to drop. Drop. Hey!
Raider training also means they must learn to handle a wide variety of demolitions, expertly, safely, effectively. Training for long-range reconnaissance patrols is an extension of the Raider School. Here, students get even more intensive training in how to operate undetected deep in enemy territory, to remain there for days, even weeks, to gather intelligence about the enemy and bring it back.
Check the jumper's helmet for chin strap. Then you move down to the canopy release assemblies. Check it to be sure it is secure, and then cover it.
In the Advanced Airborne School, a group learns how to function in the role of jump master. The instructor is teaching them how to conduct the safety check of paratroopers' jump equipment.
Safety fork is inserted. Then you move around to the jumper's right to the waistband. Follow the waistband around behind the reserve parachute. Follow it all the way around to the quick release. Then move to the reserve parachute.
The safety of the men under his command is a jump master's paramount concern. Obviously, it is a matter of life or death that all hooks, straps, and lines are properly in place. This concern for every detail of safety carries over to the interior of the jump aircraft. The instructor shows how the jump master must check out everything, every inch of the anchor line cable. The fire extinguisher, it has to be there, filled and up to pressure. From end to end of the big troop compartment, the jump master's job is to make sure, personally, right down to the jump lights by the door.
Outboard personnel, stand up! Inboard personnel, stand up! Hook up!
The students also learn the jump procedures and voice commands that control and direct the paratroopers until the final moment when they'll step out the door and be on their own.
Check static line! Check equipment! Sound off for equipment check! Okay.
In the Advanced Airborne School, students also study air movement operation in terms of equipment. The 82nd trains its own specialists in the techniques of loading and securing cargo for air landing operations. They also learn how to rig heavy objects for airdrop, the longshoreman's skill refined to the nth degree. In the Supply and Maintenance School, student officers learn how to calculate supply requirements for different size units and how to systematically inspect fighting equipment to make sure it's always ready to go.
Right now.
By the number.
The 82nd's Non-Commissioned Officer School puts the focus on small unit leadership. The NCO is a basic and vital element in any unit's chain of command. In this school, his natural leadership potential is honed and polished. In the 82nd Airborne, the competitive spirit is encouraged by an intensive sports program. It is justly proud of its Olympic medal winners, Sergeant James Wallington, who brought back a bronze medal for boxing. Sergeant Wallington is equally skilled in his job as a member of the division's highly effective and fully air-portable communications network. And there's Captain Mel Pender, gold medal winner in the 400-meter relay. Captain Pender's main interest, however, remains his professional mission as an officer of the 82nd. But perhaps no sport so truly represents the airborne as the free-fall parachuting of the 82nd Sport Parachute Club.
Schools and recreation programs, work and play, all directed to the end of keeping the 82nd tuned to perfect pitch in order to carry out its mission as the airborne arm of Strike Command.
These men starting out on a typical training maneuver are known as an immediate ready force. The IRF could be a company, battalion, or brigade in many combinations of firepower according to the need. Whatever and wherever the need, these men are ready to respond. Each one superbly trained, strongly disciplined, ready. When they move fast. The complex paperwork of personnel and cargo lists is handled with lightning speed by computerized equipment. This ability to pick up and go, far, fast, and fully armed, was dramatically demonstrated in 1969 exercise called Focus Retina. 2,500 troopers of the 82nd were deployed from the United States to Korea in a matter of hours. The entire exercise took only 5 days and involved more than 7,000 troops of the United States and South Korea.
This is the 82nd Airborne Division, peerless among fighting units. Its history is long and famous, crowded with great battles and inspiring deeds of valor. But its story is far from over. You will surely hear from it again when a call comes to defend this country's freedom. The division will always be in the forefront of battle, and beyond all doubt will prove again, over and over if necessary, that in fighting skill, courage, and devotion to duty, the men of the 82nd are indomitable. They are all American, all the way.
We're coming through, take your jump, take your pump.